Tonight, our panel is about the pioneers of CGI education. Let us introduce Bill Joel and take it away, good doctor.
Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you. Yes, this is the pioneers of CGI education, and we've got some really good panelists tonight. In fact, three of our panelists are recipients of the SIGGRAPH Distinguished Educator Award, and that would be Barbara Mones, Don Greenberg, and Ed Angel. And we also have a former and current chair of the SIGGRAPH Education Committee, and that'd be Scott Owen and Glenn Goldman. And I'm hoping to get some really good discussion out of them. But to get things moving, I'd like to have each panelist give us a 5-minute introduction to them, how, what you've done in computer graphics, and how did you get into computer graphics education in the first place. And I'm going to start with Barbara.
Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm honored and super excited about it. And I have a little bit of a introduction based on the question, how did I get involved with computer graphics and education? Essentially, I'm going to start, because we're pioneers, I'm going to start pretty early on, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened when I got involved with SIGGRAPH. First of all, let me just say that I am a teaching professor at the University of Washington, and my job has been to, I came from industry, I came from Industrial Light Magic, and my job has been to take a group of students that are from many different departments and have no background in graphics, animation, or making films. And we spent 8 months having them create films. I've done this since 1999, so they're 25 or so. There's a lot of films, and they're very, very different from one another. So I wanted to just talk about how this fit me. And it's a little bit of a retrofit right now, but so essentially, you know how they say that you learned everything you need in kindergarten, but I learned a lot of what I actually got interested in and know about in summer camp. And in summer camp, I was identified as a minnow, and because I could swim. And what was really exciting about it, and the only thing I remember about summer camp really, is that they gave us, they split us up into groups. They gave us a bag and they gave us a bunch of objects, and they asked us to make a story and then act it out. And I have never been the same, because I had so much fun, and it actually filled a whole lot of kind of interest for me, including forming a little community, creating a story together, working with people I'd never met, and the idea of acting it out, even though I was not a great actor, and then essentially learning from that. So I'm going to also go to the next. This is actually a picture of my mother, and I want to tell a very short story about her, which is that I had a best friend, and my best friend could draw beautifully, and she could draw everything realistically to perfection, and it depressed me because I was never great at drawing. And so we took a little walk, and she said to me that my friend really was talented, but I had something different, and that I was creative. And I remember I was about 10 or 11. I didn't know what it even was. So I asked her what it was. She kind of told me it was putting things together that didn't necessarily go together, but making them fit. And as a result, she really helped me understand and appreciate that I could be creative. So fast forward to ILM, and they had an art show every year. And in this art show, I actually decided to show some of the work that I had done long ago. And the colleagues came to me and said, my colleagues said, these are really cool creatures. And I had never thought of them as creatures. I thought of them as portraits. And so that allowed me to actually think about, believe it or not, storytelling in a different way, and graphics and ways to animate. And I realized at that time that I actually thought of animation as moving 3D sculpture. So basically, my experience in camp helped me many, many years later working with students. And I actually worked with students before computers, and we actually made collective and collaborative and interdisciplinary work. And this is actually a whole bunch of clay pieces that got fired and made into a fence. And each student actually decided what their part of the fence looked like. And then we set it up in the farm at Rhode Island School of Design. Fast forward, and I come to SIGGRAPH, and I actually came to SIGGRAPH as a result of two things. I worked with a guy named Don Day, who is a physicist and taught me a whole lot about color. And as a result, I was really interested in the whole idea of additive color, which I hadn't been exposed to. And I met these two people, Russell and Joan Kirsch. And Russell was doing a presentation. He was the head of mathematics at the National Bureau of Standards. And I went to the presentation, and he literally came the next morning to pick me up with his wife and drove me to SIGGRAPH. So that's how I got to SIGGRAPH. At SIGGRAPH, I learned about stereo graphics, and from there, developed a bunch of sculptures where I actually used my animation and 3D capabilities to think about how you add creativity from a kind of a mixed reality perspective. I used that idea as a way to bring 4 graduate students together so that they can, in fact, use stereo graphics to have a complete replica of the art department's studio. And they each had a one-person show at the same time in the same place, which was quite unusual at the time. And that was a different way of thinking as a result. And so this is what the actual space looked like. And this was one person's version of it. I want to end on what happened next, which is I got involved in VR as kind of an extension of 3D and stereo work, and worked with Tom Furness, and as a result, developed a bunch of projects with students where they are able to reconstruct what it might be like for the Pacific Northwest orcas. And then they actually allow people, the orcas come to get you, and they teach you how to be an orca. We've also done this with octopuses that were actually living on campus. And I want to end basically by saying that this idea of mixed reality, it actually happened before I got to SIGGRAPH, and my thoughts have not really changed, but every time I've actually experienced something that's different with the technology and graphics, it has enabled me to do something more creative with my students. So I wanted to end just by showing you a thank you note. And the whole point of this thank you note is not to show you that the students were thanking me, it's that they're thanking me for an experience. And so I just wanted to say that if I give the class a really good experience, then the idea I hope is that they do what I've done, which is in different parts of my experience with these tools and with computer graphics, I've been able to be creative and to think of new ways of developing my own work, my research, and then as a result, my teaching.
Okay, Barbara, thank you very much. Next up is Glenn Goldman, who is the current chair of the SIGGRAPH Education Committee.
I'm Glenn Goldman. I am an architect and a designer. It's interesting, actually, given the demographics of SIGGRAPH, that it looks like a third of the people on the panel here are architects, and that is highly unusual. But I am grateful to be in the same category as Don here. So I didn't come to computer graphics as such, and although I teach the use of computer graphics and it's integral into everything I've done, I'm a licensed architect. I've built buildings, and I was hired at the New Jersey Institute of Technology in 1982 to teach architecture and design, and actually to teach mechanical equipment, HVAC, acoustics, lighting, water systems, and that's how I got started. And what happened was, as any junior faculty member might happen, I was asked to apply for a research grant. New Jersey had, it's called technical engineering, higher education technical engineering grants, and they were funding universities by RFPs. And the provost turned to me at a meeting and he said, Glenn, you're going to submit a grant for this. And I said, okay. And I went with a colleague of mine, Steve Zadebski, and we put together a grant for the New Jersey Department of Higher Education. And we weren't told what we had to do. It just had to be something technical. And we had a proposal that we were going to show in architectural design. We're looking at both, we were both licensed architects. We both had built buildings. We both came from industry to NJIT. And that we could use computers more efficiently and faster than we could do things by hand. And that part was a spectacular failure, which I will explain in a moment. And also we wanted to leverage the trend towards distributed computing and its associated lower costs to help multiple students design. So this was the early mid 1980s, and we were using we wanted to be able to use personal computers so that we could get them in the hands of all of our students who were largely first generation college students, and we were an under-resourced public university, and we thought we could do. So we settled on IBM. I'm going to share something with you. So hopefully you can see that. So we settled on the IBM AT computers, and that's actually me in the foreground and Steve in the background. And the first thing that we found was that, even though we were commuting school, students were staying all night long in the lab to actually work on it. And we were starting to leverage 3D graphics in order to, because we found some program that was designed for irrigation that we then kind of twisted to use for architecture. And this was in 1985. And we found something else called a it's so 1980s, the name of this Discortex CX1 converter, which was a controller had 3 intensity filters for RGB in 16 stages. It cost under $300 for the board, and it gave us, we could only have 16 colors at a time, but it gave us a palette of 250,000 colors in 1985. And architecture students at that time were all designing in black and white. So this was a whole new world. Now, the one thing we proved was that Steve and I had traditionally trained, we could both draw a lot faster than AutoCAD could. I mean, a lot faster. And we could do it better, and it looked better. So that part was a failure, but we found other things that were absolutely amazing. And that's where, that's where, this doesn't look like much, but this was a study of Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple in Oak Park, Illinois. And we learned that using something as simple as wireframe, we could start looking at space and elements across space instead of just adjacencies. There were all sorts of things that we could do that we couldn't do before. It facilitated volumetric studies. We could start moving things around. There were all sorts of things that we wanted to do. And soon enough, because I don't have a lot of time, just jump forward, our studio started looking like this, and then they look like this. And now it's not uncommon. I have students, some students will be sketching, some students will be looking like this. And we even had, just before COVID, so this was in, like January 2020, we had an accreditation visit for the interior design program. This was my studio. And that person is the chair of the visiting team for accreditation. We've been doing fully electronic accreditations since 2008 with architecture. We were the first to do it in architecture. We did it for CETA, NAAB, and for NASAD. So I got into using computer graphics because I was a designer and I wanted to do more interesting work as a designer. And I wasn't afraid to try things, and I certainly wasn't afraid to fail. That was one of the wonderful things about being a teacher and working at a university, that you could try things and fail. And we tried things fairly early compared to a lot of other people, which garnered a substantial amount of industry support that allowed our school and me and my colleagues to continue to do different things. My first SIGGRAPH was in 1988. I have not missed a single one since. The two where I was, where I had to go because of COVID, I was could only attend virtually, but all the others I've been in person. I became involved in SIGGRAPH really through education. Both the first time I actually presented at SIGGRAPH, I was convinced to do that by Steve Cunningham. First time I presented was in 1991 in Las Vegas. I would participate. I was convinced to participate in the education committee where the faculty submitted student work. I could see what others do. Been on the education committee for a long time. I was the education liaison for SIGGRAPH 2013. I was the courses chair for SIGGRAPH 2015. I've ended up, because of all of this, I ended up writing really the first textbook for architecture students that became the transition between traditional media and digital media back in 1995 for Prentice Hall. I'm fortunate in position to have been able to do a lot of different things very early, and I'm still experimenting. I'm still learning, which is why I keep coming to SIGGRAPH and why I love being in school and being with teachers. And I think I just about got it in to 5 minutes.
Okay, Glenn, thank you very, very much. And now we move to another one of our SIGGRAPH Distinguished Educators, Ed Angel. Take it away, Ed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Ed Angel. I'm here in New Mexico. I started off in New York and all through high school, and then I was fortunate enough to get to go to California in 1960, which was a good time to go. And I was at Caltech, and then I did graduate work at USC. But at that time, I was an electrical engineer, but I really don't know any electrical engineering. I mean, I was always sort of a problem when I got hired to a new university and they realized how little I knew. But I was pretty good at applied math. And what I wound up doing was using optimization methods from systems and control to work on two-dimensional PDEs. And then it was actually a pretty short jump with my colleague Anil Jain at USC to see that we could use these methods to do image processing. And we worked on image restoration and coding for a long time. So about 10 years later, if I jump ahead through skip some other places I was at, I was in New Mexico, and I was in electrical engineering at that time, and I was teaching systems and control and some computer design. My friend Cleve Moeller, who of MATLAB fame, was then chair of CS, and I was head of computer engineering. And we lost our adjunct who was teaching computer graphics, and he challenged me to teach it. So I took it on. And I realized how different it was, because I was thinking in terms of pixels, and that was, about 1983. And I said, how can you do this with three-dimensional pixels? You couldn't do it then. And I learned. I started off with Newman and Sproul, and then Foley and Van Dam, and then I slowly started learning things, started going to SIGGRAPH. But the problem then for us, and a lot of schools were starting to have computer graphics course. It wasn't just the high-end research-oriented places. The students wanted it. They had seen Tron, and they'd seen a lot of things on television, and they wanted to be able to create their own graphics. So I saw the problem that we didn't have the software or the hardware to do that. So I did some work to get some hardware for them, our first VAX, then some terminals, but the software was really an issue, because we'd start off and if you had a terminal on a computer, there's very little you could do in those days. And so what happened was I started looking at various kinds of software, and I worked my way up through the Foley and Van Dam software. And then I said, I didn't want to create my own. I decided that was not going to work. And so I went through GKS, I went through Suncor, and none of them were quite right. And then one of my graduate students who was doing his research at Sandia came to me and said, we have these SGIs, and this GL is much easier to program with than any of the stuff you were using. And in fact, that was true. I wound up doing a crazy trade of a VAX for an early SGI machine. And we started doing that, and that led to my book eventually. And the whole idea was that we wanted to get students to program 3D as soon as they could, and we could fill in the algorithms and the low-level stuff later. And that worked remarkably well. The book is now in its 8th edition. Dave Schreiner's now my co-author. I needed somebody a little younger to help me. But that's sort of half of me. The other half of me was much more oriented, and especially for the last 25 years, which I could sort of put under the heading of computer graphics for all. I was part of an NSF project called CS for All, but this was getting computer graphics for all. And ever since I was a graduate student, when I was teaching courses at night for engineers at some of the aerospace companies that were in fear of getting laid off, I was very concerned about getting more education out to people. And so I started doing a lot of short courses with integrated computer systems that became Learning Tree. And I was going all around the world doing short courses, and then a lot in South America. But the other thing that really changed what I was doing is my students. So not only did a student introduce me to OpenGL, to GL, and then OpenGL and WebGL, but while I was on sabbatical, they started a SIGGRAPH chapter in New Mexico, and that became the second largest SIGGRAPH chapter in the country. And we were getting, speakers, and people were bringing in hardware, and it put us in touch with the art community. And then one of my other students who I introduced to a local artist who was interested, they started taking over the computers at night and weekends at Sandia to do Maya, or the predecessor of Maya. And they wanted to teach a course. So for years, I was fronting a course in an animation course in the art that was joint between art and engineering, but in fact, it would get a lot of community people. And that led me eventually to go over to art half time, where I ran the Art Technology Center, and then the Arts Lab, which was a interdisciplinary involving the whole campus. And what was different about it is we were very tied in to the equality of teaching, research, and economic development within the university, which I'd never had done. And so we had a lot of work with the film industry, and it was a very interesting effort that went on for a long time. And so let me just finish by saying that I found out now, I've been retired, but still work with them a lot, that they had no students, and it was very hard to get the faculty in art to be interested in this. But the students were really excited because they didn't have to go work at Kinko's. They were going to ILM, they were going to Pixar, they were going to Disney. So they were really enthusiastic. Well, right now, I learned that this week, there's now 600 students in art that are part of this program. And there's probably 200 or 300 more in computer science that look at what they're doing as wanting to go into these areas. So it's been a very interesting journey to do that. Did I make 5 minutes?
Yeah, you did very well. You did excellent. We will be sending the gold star for you through the mail. Don't worry. Next up, we have a former Education Committee Chair, Scott Owen.
Thank you, Bill. I came to computer graphics in a roundabout fashion, and my bachelor's and PhD degrees were actually both in chemistry, and I had pretty much a full academic career in chemistry before I moved into a computer science department. I always used computers and computer graphics. We're talking punch cards and tapes for data analysis and computer simulation. What really did it for me was in 1977, I got an Apple II. And all of a sudden I had this little machine that I could program interactive graphics on, simplistic graphics, but still interactive graphics. Started using that for chemical education, and actually became chair of the American Chemical Society Chemical Education Division, Computers in Chemical Education. And I taught some short courses in computer graphics to other chemistry faculty so that they could write these programs, these educational programs. I actually joined SIGGRAPH in 1980, but my first SIGGRAPH conference was in 87. I moved over to computer science department in 84. Georgia State started a computer science program. And I went to my first SIGGRAPH in 87, met Steve Cunningham, who was at the time the chair of he was the first chair of the Education Committee. In 89, I joined the Education Committee, met Barbara, a friend of my life. And in 90, became chair of the Education Committee and sort of stayed in that position, became an executive committee position for 6 years. And that was a very interesting time in computer graphics because there was a booming interest in computer graphics, but nobody really, a lot of people wanted to know more about it, but didn't know much about it. Barbara went off and did a curriculum for art educators, which got published in College Art Association. There were a lot of small colleges where they had faculty who wanted to teach computer graphics but didn't know anything about it. So wrote some NSF grants, and for 3 summers brought in 20 faculty from small schools each summer and taught them a short course in computer graphics so they could go back and use it. We were using at that time IBM PCs, and not any workstations because these schools could not afford workstations. Later on, a few years later, actually the sort of the boom in visualization occurred, and we did some more short courses in visualization. So since then, I mean, I started courses at Georgia State in computer graphics, undergraduate and graduate. We didn't really have a program because it was really just me. One interesting course I taught was an animation course that had students for both art and computer science and film and video departments. And then after that, I mean, I've stayed involved with Gita. I worked with Gita Domick, Austrian, who's a professor at University of Paderborn in Germany for several years on the visualization. And Gita and I started the IEEE CGNA Education Department, which we did for 2010 to 2016, and then turned it over. Since then, and I've stayed somewhat active in SIGGRAPH, conference chair, president, past president, various committees. That's it.
Scott, thank you very, very much. And now we saved the best for last. Sorry, guys. Another distinguished educator from SIGGRAPH, Don Greenberg.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for allowing us to talk about this. I'm going back to my high school senior year when I was 17 years old, and I loved to draw, and I was somewhat skilled in math. And anybody that liked art and math, the guidance counselor said I should apply to architecture school. So I did, and I fell in love with the profession of being able to design and the engineering. But I really was much better in the engineering side. And I wanted to become a shell engineer. And by shell engineer, I was hoping to make thin shell concrete structures like this, which I did with my class in 1965. And I did this with half architects and half engineers. And that's what I thought I was going to do. I studied with Salvadori at Columbia and worked in New York City. And Salvadori said, go take a computer course. You're not going to be solving 8th order differential equations any longer. And I said, well, which one should I take? He said, well, we don't have any computer sciences at Columbia yet. Go take one down at NYU, which I did. And all of a sudden I was an engineer practicing, and I knew something about the computer. And then I got involved with such things at an engineering firm as the St. Louis Arch, the Lincoln Center, the Munich Olympics cable structures, a whole bunch of stuff, and came back to Cornell to just write my thesis. And while I'm here in 1967, a guy by the name of Rod Ruggelo came to give a lecture. And he was a good friend of mine. And he was showing us in an art invited lecture how you could make pictures with a computer. And at the time he was in Syracuse, New York, at General Electric, and they were building simulators to train the astronauts how to dock the lunar landing vehicle with the Apollo mother spacecraft. And this is 1967. And I fell in love with the field, and it changed my life. And so I hope Rod gets to see this, because I still say that every time I see him. In either case, within another year or so, General Electric, which was an 8 to 5 outfit, allowed me to use their lab. And I used their lab from 5 in the afternoon until 8 in the morning. Upon which time, when I missed coming home to coach my kids' soccer teams or something like that, and I wasn't back yet, somebody asked where I was, and my wife said she didn't know. And the answer was, well, he either has a mistress or he's in computer graphics. That's pretty right. And at least the computer graphics part. And with 14 architects and pounds of IBM punch cards and punch paper tape, because the memory couldn't store enough of the environment, we made a movie which is called Cornell in Perspective, and I'm giving it to the Computer History Museum this year as we do it. But by good luck, I wrote an article, and I think this is what enabled me to be successful at Cornell. It's the cover of Scientific American, and it showed us taking this building, which is Cornell's Johnson Art Museum, designed by I.M. Pei, of which I had the drawings, but it has not yet been built. And I took it and I put it on the campus and then put it in the middle of the quadrangle and made some spoof comments about this movie, which is 18 minutes long. But I showed the museum in the middle of the quadrangle, which of course was terrible. And the biggest problem I had was all the alumni that I'd seen this publicity and seen the picture said it was a terrible place to put it, and I had to answer their mail. But that was before there was an internet, and there were only typewriters or by hand. And so I had to spend most of my time answering their quests. I go past that, and SIGGRAPH had its first conference in 1974. I went to the wrong one. There was a computer-aided design conference in Boulder. And then the week after that, it was the computer graphics conference. And I went to the CAD conference because I wanted to use this for building design in the future. Bob Schiffman ran this. And at that stage of the game, I finally started to meet some people, all mavericks, all with crazy backgrounds, all looking for something new. And that was SIGGRAPH. And I haven't missed a conference except for COVID since 1975. And I could add another 5 outside the United States. I'm still an unclassified student. I don't know what the hell I am, but I do teach in computer science. I teach in engineering mechanics and structural engineering. I've taught animation courses in the art school. I've even taught disruptive technology in the business school. And now my project, since I'm still teaching full time, that I'm trying to build digital twins of the built environment. And I'll talk about this later with respect to the future, but you can't make a prototype of a building which has not yet been built. So it becomes a very interesting problem. I feel absolutely fantastic because this is a 50th anniversary in a sense for SIGGRAPH, but it's also, last year was the 50th anniversary of the people that had helped make all of the movies. And I'm now hearing back from thousands of my former students this month as they're starting to write the history of color graphics. Because we had a motto here that we would like to make images which are physically accurate and perceptually indistinguishable from real world scenes. So after finding from some of my colleagues why ray tracing was too expensive and radiosity would never work, we plowed ahead. And it's interesting to talk about this later on than about myself. And I just appreciate the fact that the world is interdisciplinary with fuzzy boundaries. And I think SIGGRAPH is both my academic home, and I hope it will be for future generations of students. And thanks for the opportunity.
Don, thank you really, really much. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to do the wrap up of the backgrounds with myself. I'm kind of the young guy on this panel for tonight. But the way I got into it was I had a father who went to the, I guess you would call it the High School of Art and Design in New York City when he was a teenager. And then this thing called World War II came around, so he couldn't finish, but he loved art. And he just imbued my brother and I with a love of art as well. Or as in our house, Walt Disney was the king in our house. He was the god. So along the way, I really got interested in art. And I was doing all kinds of drawings, et cetera, as a kid. And when I got to high school in my junior year, one of our math teachers said, "Hey, you want to learn how to program?" And a whole bunch of us said, "Sure, give me $25." And we did. And we got shared time on Grumman's system. And we learned Fortran 4. But along the way, I was teaching myself how to do photography, enlargement, et cetera, work with the chemicals and the papers. I was teaching myself woodcuts, teaching myself how to do silk screening, et cetera. And I'm doing this all the way through, because when I got to my degree in college, which Scott was also in chemistry, I have a bachelor's in chemistry, but my senior thesis was writing software to do the statistical analysis for the grad students. Then I went for my master's in chemistry, and my thesis was writing software to do computations for a model for a chemical reaction. So, and then I got into industry, and I'm trying to be a chemist, but I keep getting hired to work with databases and to work with information retrieval. And by the time I got my first teaching gig, which was at a small college in Poughkeepsie, New York, I realized, I said, "You're not a chemist anymore. You haven't been a chemist for a long time. You've been a computer scientist." You just realize it. And my first chair, when he heard about all the stuff I had done all along the way in the arts, he said, "You know, you would be perfect for computer graphics." So I taught it, and it was like falling in love. This is where I should be. And then in 1986, thank you, Steve Cunningham, I was one of the first 15 to get an educator's grant to attend SIGGRAPH in Dallas, Texas. Barbara, were you in that group too?
I was on the committee that selected those people.
You were on the committee. So you're the ones who selected me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. And then, I mean, once I met the people on the committee and Steve and everybody else, I'm like, okay, I have just come home. These are the people I should be with, I should be working with. And I have been on the education committee for the most part over all these years. I cannot say that I've attended every single SIGGRAPH. There was a portion during my career where I did not have the finances. I wasn't working for a school where I could really do it. So I didn't have the finances. I missed a few, including, believe it or not, both times that the conference was in New Orleans, I could not go. And I am so annoyed. That really annoys me. But some of the other things I did is just being on the education committee, and I continue to be on the education committee. And one of my pet areas is research, specifically undergraduate research. And I don't mean just computer science. I mean in all the disciplines that feed into computer graphics and interactive techniques. In fact, back in 2019, I started an initiative called Computer Graphics and Animation Research Projects. It's an international group. Of course, we know what happened in 2019, which was called COVID. And that was a wonderful time to start this project. We're coming back out of the ashes right now. Also, back in 2016, I started another program for animation, which is Massive Collaborative Animation Projects, which is still going, which puts together undergraduate students worldwide to work in animation projects. I'm just an advocate for getting students involved, getting them off their duffs and getting them to do stuff. do an animation project, work with other students, do a research project, work with other students, try ideas. And I also believe that any student, freshman up through senior, any of them can contribute to a project. They all have something they can contribute. Unlike I know some other people I've talked to said, well, you got to be a senior before you can do research in computer science. And I'm like, oh, that's baloney. You could be doing research as a freshman. You can learn. Yes, you don't know as much as the senior does, but that doesn't matter. And that's my 2 cents about who I am and where I've come from. First question I want to raise is, can you come up with, in computer graphics education, not you specifically, but in the general field of computer graphics education, what is one thing that has happened that you think was a really important event? It was a milestone event for computer graphics education. Scott.
I will go back to what really excited me, and that's the advent of the personal computer, such that all of a sudden you didn't have to have $10,000 or $20,000 to buy a workstation. You could basically for $1,500 at the time, I mean, you could get a nice machine which could do graphics, and that continued to evolve in capability, such that actually at one point I actually taught the introductory computer graphics class, and I had them write ray tracers. I mean, which would have been very difficult. So I think, to me, that has been a huge improvement.
Well, as somebody who started his programming career using punch tape, I agree with you thoroughly. Barbara, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I think this may not be what you're looking for, but I think one of the huge advances is to get for computer graphics to allow folks all over the world to work together, and in particular students. So I know we did a project for the electronic theater called Figurative Field with about 12 or 13 different schools all over the world. And that could not have happened if we didn't have the same tools to work with.
We're talking about the internet and all communication, et cetera. It's all the tools that we have.
Well, we didn't really. So a lot of the stuff was actually sent in snail mail, but they use graphics. They use computer graphics in there, and they animated their segment. Yeah.
Glenn, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, I agree with Barbara and Scott especially, but I think in terms of education, there was another event, at least for architecture and design, that helped the people who were doing this. Part of it, at least architecture, as much as I love it, tends to lag behind sometimes. Don is agreeing, lag behind the state of the art. And what's happened is that there was an educator at one school or another, and not only were they lonely, they were frequently ostracized because it was a threat to the old way of doing things. Believe it or not, when I was in graduate school, I was taught how to draw in ink with a crow quill pen because sometimes rapidograph might break. And when I asked the teacher, well, if the crow quill pen breaks, am I supposed to go out, catch a pigeon and pluck it? And he got very angry at me. So what happened was actually in October 1981, there was a first meeting of an organization called the CADIA, the Association for Computer-Aided Design and Architecture. And there were people like Chuck Eastman and Bill Mitchell, Chris Yesios, Yuta Calais, and others met at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And a lot of these people many of them were who we consider founders of computer graphics and architecture and design, were, for lack of a better word, were persecuted in their home institutions. They really were. It's astounding. And this was a place where it was the safe space, so to speak. And it was also the place where, at least until 2000, things changed after the turn of the century, but at least until 2000, where new developments, new applications, and new things were first presented. There was SIGGRAPH, and a number of us attended SIGGRAPH. Not that many of us, but a number did. But Acadia, it's gotten diffused since then. And the reason I said to 2000, because after that point, sort of associated organizations like ECADE, CADRIA, SIGGRADI, and ASCAD, where they became localized in each continent. But up until about 2000, there was only one conference and only one group, and it was truly international, and it was small, so there were no parallel sessions. Everybody got to see everything, and that way you could take what you learned and you could share it, you could learn from others, and in terms of making a difference, it's only made a difference in my career. Between that and then and SIGGRAPH, I think those are two incredibly important events that pushed forward the entire field of computer graphics, because as important as all these things are, the equipment, you don't have all these developments without actually people and researchers creating them. And a lot of that was happening in schools. And a lot of that was happening in very, very small groups in schools. You've already met, you started from chemistry, they've starting from math. There are all sorts of different places that you could start from. And we ended we all ended up here. And it's not the kind of story you can think up in advance. You wouldn't, this is rather improbable the way it all came out.
Yeah, I see Don's raising the hand. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, well, I don't have a precise one single event, but I have about 3 sentences which I think are important. The first is 99% of our informational content comes through our eyes. It's visual, it's 3-dimensional, it's graphical, it's got feel and touch and so on. The second thing that came about is that 2 diverse disciplines started to talk to each other and fortunately survived both ways, even though they were antagonistic to some degree. And the first, of course, is that Moore's law is still holding. And from the time, yes, it takes more time, it's slowing down.
It is.
But I have in my workstation now 100 billion times more power than I had when I started. And so we can compute anything. And I think that's very important. And why it took so long to be accepted is that the people who were fighting the limitations of the computers they were using came from this odd group of people who got sucked into entertainment and making pictures called SIGGRAPH. And I think one of the flaws that we have today is when we talk about the history of what was done, we don't talk enough about the environment in which it was done and why we did it that way, because those constraints are now eliminated. And I hope when we end this session, we can talk about what's next.
We are going to be talking about what's next. And actually, you're bringing up something. A lot of the research I do, please don't laugh, but actually, you can laugh if you want, I don't care. A lot of the research I do, believe it or not, is going to my local Starbucks, bringing my iPad, okay, and getting my cup of coffee and sitting there and working on programs on the iPad. And I tell students, they go, what are you doing on an iPad for? I said, because when I'm working on a new algorithm, I don't care how fast it works. I just care whether it works or not. And the iPad is fast enough for me to get a result in a reasonable time and I'm programming, well, whatever language I'm choosing, and it's working. And then if something works, I can easily port it over to a better language and a better computer. But this is the concept I'm hearing, is that it's the advent of the personal computer and the tools that have become available, let's say since mid 80s, early 90s. They've really gotten better and better and better. And I got Ed's got a hand up, and then I see Barbara. So Ed, go.
Oh yeah, I just want to a couple of short things. Yeah, I wanted to bring up the issue of the software because it wasn't just that we got PCs and workstations, is that we had software that was actually usable by people. And the other a big part of that is what happened on the art side, is that students, when Maya became available everywhere, that you got this rush of students that didn't need to go to computer science programs. They would, a lot of them did a little programming, but they could actually do things. And I wanted to do one more thing going way back that maybe Don would, because I really think one of the big events was Foley and Van Dam, and that it established the academics of it, that established the fundamentals of what computer graphics is about. And those are still the fundamentals that I think we all want to include in what we teach. And before that, I'm not sure, when I started, what there was. And then I discovered those. So want to bring, and also let me bring one more thing, Pixar, because Pixar proved on both sides. It proved that you actually could make money by doing a fully animated movie. And second, the level of science and algorithms and high-end computer graphics that went in to do that was all in one place.
Well, that was also because of Ed Catmull. He was a huge influence on that.
Yes,
bringing in the more scientific.
Pat Hanrahan, Ed Catmull,
yeah,
but some of the people that were working on it, if you looked at what was going on, a lot of things that were going on were not necessarily in the university. They were happening out there at places like Pixar.
It changes the role of faculty members, and it changes the whole idea of. I think it is still changing. Where computer graphics lives in an academic institution, because we have a lot of shifting sands as a result, because there are potential collaborations, there are different, for a long time, I've just decided not to identify myself as an artist or a computer scientist or a computer graphics or an animator or whatever. Because to me, it's this kind of the field allows you to go in so many different directions, and that actually opens up lots of doors, but it's not clear. It still to this day means that a lot of different academic institutions are trying to figure out how best to support that.
Well, actually, you're raising the next question. You're heading into it, and it's that computer graphics in the early days, especially in education, was kind of an odd person out if you're involved in it. And I will just give you my quickie story where when it was my first job teaching, they took all of us in the computer science department for some visiting dignitaries, and they said, so-and-so does databases, so-and-so works with algorithm development. Oh, Bill, he makes pretty pictures. Because they really didn't know what to do with computer graphics. It wasn't really understood, and I keep telling the students, I said, computer graphics, you think it's an easy one? Well, guess what? Remember all that algebra, trig, and calculus you learned? You're going to have to start using it. And they go, what? And I go, yes, that's computer graphics from a programming side. So the next question I want to raise to the group is, talk to me about what it was like being this essentially an interdisciplinary person. A person who was interested in not only programming and math, but also interested in the artistic, the aesthetics, and trying to get things done. And I'm assuming this, and when I'm saying this is true, in the typical academic environment of ivory towers. This is computer science. This is art. This is architecture. And Ed's going, oh yeah. Ed,
no, that's a great question. You want me to say something?
Yeah. How'd you get through that to really make the point that computer graphics?
Hey, it's the one use of tenure that I was sort of anti-tenure, but it saved me so many times by being able to do this, because I had trouble on both sides. The students got it, but the administrators didn't. I mean, at one time they tried to take away my joint appointment because they didn't believe in that, or they didn't believe that we could have interdisciplinary faculty. They go, oh no, you have to make your mark in one or the other. And now the environment has totally changed. The interdisciplinary is big, but boy, it was, well, and when we got into economic development, that was a further adventure. But the change, I just want to say the changes are unbelievable. So when I had my joint appointment in art, and we started working with the film industry in New Mexico, the department I was in refused to have anything to do with the commercial film industry. And they were a tiny 2-person department. Now they're about the most popular department on campus. And so, you know, fortunately things have changed, but that brings back a lot of odd memories. It's
Barbara, you
Oh, PTSD, a lot of it. So, yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
I taught, I started out in a school of art, and then I went to engineering, and I was even in physics. I went into industry. Well, originally I had a half CS and half art. That was really interesting. And then I went to industry, and now I'm in a computer science, School of Computer Science and Engineering. I will just say, I don't think I've changed. I mean, I think that my interests have not changed. I'm sure I have changed. I've changed in many positive ways as a result of actually being in all these places. But a lot of this is just because when you're a pioneer, no, when you're the one who actually, they don't know where to put you, right? So what I will make a big plug for is that I think in my experience anyway, there's something about computer scientists and a school of computer science and engineering that is more open in some ways, or has been more open. I was tenured in a school of art as well. So it's been interesting because I just follow my nose, but I think that because there are so many different structures, and you know, I think that curriculum is in fact shifting sands. I think, but business, you know, schools are businesses, and so they have to figure out how to function as a business.
You said curriculum is shifting sands. Actually, I think the way academia works, it's more like oozing mortar that sometimes cures and freezes in place. I got Scott and then Glenn. So Scott, you're up next.
I personally did not have any problem. I mean, I was the first person hired in our department, so that automatically made me senior. So when I started a computer science course, they said, fine, that's okay. Where I had problems was when I tried to reach out to other departments. I would reach out to art and film and video, and my computer science chair used to laugh at me because he said I kept reaching out to art and drawing back a bloody stump. And it amazed me because all my art friends in SIGGRAPH were saying they were dying to get computer scientists to work with them. And I said, I can't get the artists to work with me. So it was sort of the opposite, the problem. Now, finally, people understand, yes, it really is important. I don't remember who said it. It might have been somebody on this panel, that computer graphics has gone from the solution to no known problem to the solution of every known problem.
If we didn't say it, we should have. Glenn.
Yeah, well, back in 1985, when I had my third year review prior to tenure, I was told I had to change what I was doing because computing was a fad. And my response to them was, to these senior professors at the time was, well, I have 2 years to convince you that what I'm doing is worthwhile or to find another job. And either way, I'm okay with it. So I was lucky enough to get a number of grants. And I guess when you're not tenured, one of the ways to stick around is to essentially get enough industry support to keep going. So you were essentially free to them. Mm-hmm. And even then, there were people, engineers especially, who said that because I was getting industry money, that it was dirty money because it wasn't from a governmental source. I was fortunate. Again, times have changed. That's one of the things that have really changed. So I was getting, because what I was doing was different, I was getting a lot of support from industry. I wasn't getting that much support from the university, except the provost believed in what I was doing, which was, I was grateful for. And he became almost like the protector, and I did get tenure. And like Ed said, had I not had tenure, I could never have done some of the things that I was doing, because I was at the point where I was advocating for resources, and we were always being told we have to benchmark against other universities and other programs. The problem with that is, if you are only determining something by benchmarking, you will never be a leader. You will always be a follower. And so if you want to move forward, you have to do something that has not been done before, that might have a risk. And I finally got an opportunity. I was looking at other positions. 15 years ago, the dean at the time, Ersko Schott, gave me an opportunity to start a new school. And that's so rare in academia. And I was able to start the School of Art and Design, and which we alongside architecture. And we had interior design, product design, and I created a program called digital design. And the curriculum for that is modeled after SIGGRAPH. It is an interdisciplinary course. We get students from business, we get students from engineering, from computer science, from HCI, from all of these different programs, because they want to take, the students want to take it, as you've all seen that. And because it was able to start it from scratch, and I said I only wanted two things: I wanted support and independence. And I looked at some other schools, but basically we required students to take programming in their first year, art in their first year, art history in their first year. They were doing all these different interdisciplinary things. And that digital design, it's a generalist program, and it is modeled after SIGGRAPH. And it has been a success.
Well, Glenn, your comments are going into our last question. And this has to do with the fact that, I mean, everybody here, would you agree that the way you got into computer graphics were from so many different aspects, and in many ways, you are interdisciplinary? Don, you teach in how many different departments on fields? You know, and we all start in different areas. We added this, we added that, very interdisciplinary. In fact, when I go to the conference every year, I'm like, this is the only place I can talk to people who think like me, that have a broad view of what you can do, that understand that all the different disciplines that feed into SIGGRAPH, they're all important. Now, one of the things I've kind of noticed happening more and more over the years, and this is looking towards the future, how we can keep that interdisciplinary nature alive, is I see a lot of students, specifically grad students, who present at SIGGRAPH, and I'm getting the strong sensation that they have a very narrow view of what it means to work in computer graphics. But I may be wrong, but it's like they're not really looking at other they're not really looking outside of, and I'm talking about the way they have a presentation, what they're talking about, etc. They're either very, very technical. I'm talking mostly the technical side. They're really, really technical at the expense of the aesthetic elements. They just ignore it. And I'm like, what can we do in the future to maintain this fabulous interdisciplinary nature that we all grew up with in SIGGRAPH over the years, and share that and keep that in academia, so that students are coming in the future, and as well as future educators, etc., can continue to participate in this interdisciplinary sphere that we call computer graphics and interactive techniques. What can we do?
Let me change my name to Don Greenberg, and then I will answer the question. Because this is something that Don has lectured on multiple times. And I think a really important thing is to emphasize applications more, applications to different fields. And SIGGRAPH itself is looking at branching out, I mean, to different practical applications. And I think if they understand, again, that in order to do this, you need to have a very broad viewpoint, and you can't just focus in on one small area. I mean, as a graduate student, you know more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. And so I think emphasizing applications and the different possibilities of graphics is one.
Scott, you could say what I said, so it's okay. I feel very strongly about this now. I think that one of the biggest problems that we have in SIGGRAPH is we've been too successful, that everybody is overwhelmed with the beauty of the images we can create. And I think we're at the stage now where I love to use this in my class, so this is why I have it here. You probably all recognize this Magritte painting, which in French is saying, "I am not a pipe." And what Magritte was really saying is, you can't smoke me. And the next thing that we really have to do is go beyond images, because the techniques which we have been developed is exactly what Scott just said. It's applicable to hundreds of applications. And I won't go into the details, but I sometimes give a lecture called Techniques in Search of a Problem. And I take basically subdivision surfaces or spline surfaces, which were used for Ratatouille the first time and so on. And that was Ed Catmull's thesis. And I used that same software for the design of General Motors and Ford cars very early on. And from there, I've gone into the repair of aortic aneurysms by taking contour slices and then making the three-dimensional models. And my son would make the stents that would be personified so the blood wouldn't stop flowing to the subsequent arteries. And we take a look at what happened with drug design and the configuration of the geometry on where the viruses can hook onto a cell or protein folding. And you want me to keep going, and I can keep going and keep going. And I think the issue is twofold. One is convincing SIGGRAPH that we ought to show the best applications from other areas, which we haven't done. And the second, and somebody has to do this that's not my age, but how can you change a curriculum in the towers of our ivory towers, where in fact the students who want to get into this don't have the fundamentals to understand the tools which are about ready to be developed. And changing a curriculum in an academic institution is a little bit more difficult than moving a graveyard. And so I'll stop at that and wait to hear what you guys say.
Ed, go.
That's what a wonderful thing. I'm only teaching freshmen and sophomores now. And the sophomores who have taken at least 2 courses with me, or 3 or 4 computer science courses, I'm sending to industry this summer so that they can come back and teach us the robotics and the artificial intelligence and the machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks an awful lot.
Okay, Ed, I'm going to have you next, and I'm going to stop that because we're starting to get questions, and
Okay,
I wanted to leave a
let-
few minutes for questions. If you want,
Yeah,
quick,
let me
Ed.
be real quick then. I think in terms of SIGGRAPH, which I haven't been involved with as much as you guys, is that the separation between what we talk about in the education committee and the technical program is still an issue. But the second thing I have to say is that, you know, what we see in the tech part of SIGGRAPH, it's a lot of people doing their PhD studies, and what you guys have said about PhDs is true. But here's the good side from where my environment, where I live in a highly interdisciplinary state. The young faculty just are not like the old faculty. And the changes to become what had been a traditional CS department into a highly interdisciplinary department has just been an incredible change. So I think there's some good things happening.
When people work in industry, they have to be interdisciplinary.
True.
So getting the industry to communicate and to be involved from their perspective is really important, because there is this gulf between, you know, when a student graduates and where they go. So we have I think our responsibility as educators is to is to start them out, is to get them to the point where it's not, they don't actually graduate with a narrow perspective.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. J. Marshall Pittman, who's been popping a few things here. First question is, how do delivery techniques like online courses change how we approach computer graphics education?
Well, I have a question back, which is that include all the Zoom core? You know, we've been teaching online now for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, I guess they're meaning commercial online programs.
I will jump in and say for myself, I've taught during the thing, I was teaching animation classes to freshmen during the time, and it worked well. You know, it was not a problem. One of the things that online courses can do is it can provide greater flexibility for the student in like where they are, et cetera, while they're attending class. And sometimes I find students are a bit more relaxed when they're doing online. Other students, no, but it was successful. And second part of the question he asked was, are we paying attention to students individually to inspire them?
I was going to jump in on the first part, which is I've been teaching online for 30 years in various forms. And I even did a Coursera course with 14,000 people for computer graphics, and it's remarkably doable. It's a little bit different, but the issue of how you treat people as individuals is real. It's
Glenn, go ahead.
There are a couple of things. One, going on, at least within a design studio or small class, there are multiple parts. The students spend a lot of time with each other, and where they don't spend time with the teacher. And that was what we found was missing. So what I did in my class, and what others then subsequently did, is that I met with students regularly over WebEx or Zoom or Google Meet or whatever we had. But then we set up a Discord channel that I was not invited to, and that I made sure I stayed out of, and that the students simulated being together, but they did that digitally. And what happened was alumni found out about it, and they started visiting at night at 3 o'clock in the morning. Some of the design houses in New York City run 24/7. So we have students and former students who get off work at 2 o'clock in the morning because they're time shifting with all that. And they would jump on the Discord channel and they would start talking to current students and giving them design help. And so in that part, it became better. The other thing in terms of individual attention, in two ways. One, it was incredibly taxing on teachers, or at least me, because I spent at least 50% more time teaching online than when we did it face-to-face, because somehow students felt that you were always available. And one student told me, well, I'm available up until midnight. And I had to tell her, I'm not. And the other thing, though, was when we were looking at something, sometimes students are afraid to comment, especially in big groups. So what we did when we have a presentation is that we kept, especially when I had a hybrid course where I had some students in person and some online, we put the chat up on the screen, and students, instead of trying to talk over one another, we let the chat keep running. And I said, participation, it was a film class, a part of this course, and I would grab all the text from all the chat at the end, and students who would be quiet during the class were active in the chat. But even more importantly, they had something to do with their phones. We're always worried, well, they're always looking at their phone, their text. Now they had to use their phones to actually participate in the discussion in the class. We didn't allow, whether you were in person or away, we didn't allow live comments. So they had to do it over their phones. So they couldn't do any other stuff with their phones. They had to be pay attention with class with their phones. And so in terms of doing things online, it worked rather well. Do I prefer that over in person? No, I think there's some things about, being in person and face-to-face and next and serendipity that's wonderful. But I think that there's a lot of good on both sides, and we should try to leverage as much as we can. And some of the stuff I learned online, like using a phone in the chat, I now do face-to-face.
Okay, now I'm going to ask one last question. You may not have an answer for it. What can SIGGRAPH, the organization, or SIGGRAPH, the conference, your choice, do to foster the future of computer graphics education? Yes, Barbara, and then Scott.
I think they have always done this, but they can continue to be a neutral kind of space where interdisciplinary discussions happen. I know that they can also move forward with DEI initiatives. I think that they can actually be a wonderful place for industry to actually come in and chat with educators to form a kind of a rich group to try to suss out kind of what's important and how we change this faster than we do
And
on an administrative level.
and not just, would you agree, not just the usual suspects, as they say, with respect to industry, but representatives from all different kinds of industries that utilize computer graphics, digital media, interactive techniques, etc. We need to maybe broaden the kind of industries. I know personally, I think sometimes it feels a little too heavy on entertainment. I know they're big users of graphics, but there's a huge other world out there. And I try to tell students, I said, if you're only shooting for the top of the iceberg, it's really easy to miss it. But if you're shooting for that big berg underneath, with all the other companies and all the other fabulous jobs you could get and positions and careers, you got a bigger target, and you're going to get something good.
That broadens the opportunities for students as well.
Yeah, I mean, early in my career, I was doing animation freelance, and one of my companies was in Connecticut, was a local chemical company. And yeah, and the animation I created for them was not a commercial for online or anything like that. It was a commercial that was going to be shown at a conference in their field, and that's it. But it was still good work, and it's still out there. There's just so many opportunities, as long as, I think, if students get these. Scott, go for it.
I think, one obvious thing is the educators program at the SIGGRAPH conference and at SIGGRAPH Asia, the education committee. But also another thing that SIGGRAPH has started doing just in the past few years is the Frontiers workshops, the Frontiers talks. And these are basically adjacent areas where people use computer graphics, but you don't necessarily think of them as computer graphics users. Activities like that at the conference, I think, are very useful to broaden the perspective for education.
Thank you much. Well, guys, I'm watching the clock and we're pretty much out of time. So I'm going to hand this back over to Ed and let him wrap up the session. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks to Bill, Joel, and to our panelists. It's been an incredible discussion. We have done 3 other Pioneers panels that were really amazing. We did a panel on the pioneers of analog animation. We did a panel on the pioneering CGI processors. And we did a panel on the pioneers of computer-generated art. So all of those are available online, as this will be.
It's been an absolute privilege to be part of this group. It really has. Thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Virtual applause.
Real applause.
It's been an absolute privilege.
has